Hi, everyone. Welcome. And I'm Victoria, an IvyWise counselor. And we're here today to talk to you about something we do at IvyWise called Roundtable. And it is a way that we evaluate different students' applications on a week-to-week basis that really mimics what you'll find colleges do in the committee review process. So we wanted to give you a little insight into how Roundtable works. We typically will review students ahead of time and then come together as a group and discuss the essays that we've read and our interpretations, any suggestions we have for ways to improve them, and our overall thoughts on the students' candidacy. So we'd like to give you a little bit of some background insight into how this really fits in with the world of college admissions. So Carolyn, do you want to tell them about how you experienced committee review at Vanderbilt?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Like Victoria said, my name's Carolyn. I'm another one of the counselors here at IvyWise. And like Victoria was saying, part of the reason we do Roundtable here at IvyWise is because it sort of simulates the experience of committee that a lot of applications are going to go through, particularly at highly selective institutions. So when I worked in admissions at Vanderbilt, as well as when counselors work at different institutions across the country, the process of committee is often when specific admissions counselors will read applications for students that they're representing to the rest of the admissions staff. And sort of advocate for that student, really bring out the highlights, the positives, the strengths in that application, and kind of like a lawyer, sort of make a case for why that student should be admitted to that particular school. So depending on the particular college, at some schools, all applications go through committee, and some places it's only a very specific number of applications. But we found it's a very valuable process for us to sort of emulate at IvyWise to get kind of the same type of feedback that an application might receive in the admissions process, but in advance, so that the student has a chance to make whatever revisions or changes would be necessary to make the application as strong as possible. So that's the experience that we're going to kind of give you some insight into today. And I'm going to hand it over to Zach, who's going to introduce us to our student.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. I will be joining Victoria and Carolyn today in our three-person roundtable. And so I'm going to be bringing in a student and we're going to go through his entire application, from his profile to his college list, to his grades, to his common application personal statement, as well as the many essays that are part of the Stanford application. So we're actually going to begin on his profile, and I'll just do a little bit of a summary for the roundtable, and then certainly Carolyn and Victoria, if you have any other thoughts, or things that you'd like to point out, pro or con, please let me know. But this student, I really have enjoyed working with him. He's a really great kid. He's definitely doing a lot of this on his own. And as you can see, a very accomplished one. He comes to us from Franklin, Kentucky, actually a pretty small town in Kentucky. And he's #1 at his very large public school. You'll see over in his profile, from things like pretty strong ACT scores, excuse me, when you're super scoring, certainly 35 on that composite. Some nice subject tests, but not, not going to be quite at this sort of level of Stanford. It's not perfect 800s. A mixed bag of APs as well, probably speaks to, a little bit of his high school. They're not preparing for the AP exams maybe elsewhere, but certainly eager to hear your feedback on that. So yeah, I guess before we, worry about any of his activities, yeah, do you see some concerns about any of the standardized testing as far as it goes for a school like Stanford, which is definitely his #1 choice?
Is that he's taking a really challenging senior year curriculum, which is great. Like you were saying, he's taking a lot of AP courses. I do wonder, and I know we're kind of late in the process, and his ACT composites are fantastic, but looking at the fact that the science scores are the lowest in most of those testing, I do wonder if taking a shot at the SAT would be worth it, since there's not a science section on that test, just to see if you could bump those even a little bit higher.
Yeah, and I was thinking that as far as the ACT, for me, the ACT is fine, and I would probably recommend that the student not submit the subject test for Stanford because typically an 800 score, we know on Math 2, is what a lot of the highest scoring students who are good at math are going to be scoring. So I'd just rather he keep it to the side and not submit it so that they can focus on that high composite of the ACT and the high math score on that test, which is a 35. And then I would also probably hold back the AP score of 3 on the calculus AB because the others are so much stronger. And as we know, it's not required to submit AP scores to schools, so he can just self-report the other ones. They may wonder what that score is, but I think the 3 is just not going to be particularly helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I always have this dilemma with AP scores where everything looks really great, but there's the one that's below a 4. And so, is it going to work against him almost in a way if that calculus is the only one missing, or will the school just assume, Stanford or other colleges assume, maybe he just didn't take it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what you think, Carolyn, but my thought is that they could think he got a 2 or a 1 if he doesn't submit it. That is possible. But I feel like the 3, either way, it's going to do more harm than good.
I would agree. And I think if we're making the assumption that this application would be like in a committee scenario, in most cases that I've been in, they're either going to assume the best or assume nothing at all. So I think if they don't see that 3, they're just going to not consider that test. And I do think that having the 3 would hurt more than the question mark of having a blank, just assuming that it would be very rare that an admissions committee would make that negative assumption and that it would impact his chances.
Yeah,
okay, that'll make him sleep a little easier tonight. And as you can see, his interests definitely lie in the poli-sci law realm, and it's really borne out in his activities. It's probably one of the things that I think is such a standout for him is, a lot of president and founders, his school, VP. He actually was elected president, but decided to become VP because the person who was also interested in running, kind of felt like they almost deserved it more than him, to give you an idea of what he's like. But also a LEDA scholar, which I love the LEDA program. So, I think that with schools like Stanford, there's always that goal to have that something extra on the resume. And I'm hoping that some of that is here in terms of that level of initiative, but certainly curious for your own thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that really jumped out to me on his activity list was that he actually served as a campaign manager on an actual campaign. And like you said, he's in a small town, but that's still incredibly impressive. And I almost wonder if that should be pushed up higher on the list. I know that his top 2 activities, he's president and founder, which is obviously really significant. But I think the role of campaign manager is definitely something that would set him apart, even potentially within the poli-sci pre-law crowd. So I would definitely, as much as we can highlight that, I think it's going to help him out.
Yeah, I agree with Carolyn. I think it's a great activity. A lot of students are too nervous to sort of jump into those kinds of situations where you're going door to door and talking to people, and he shows initiative in doing that. I think he shows a great interest in politics, which he's got to be interested in for poli-sci, right?
Yeah.
And I think he has a lot of other great activities, right? There's a ton of leadership here and initiative, as we said, in this particular activity, but there's also a paid job, which I think is quite abnormal in some of the highly selective pools. You'll see a lot of students who are highly selective candidates, right? They have done all the work, gotten the grades, gotten the scores, but haven't really also had time to have a paid job. And I think it's impressive that amidst all of this hard work he's done, he's also worked a job as a restaurant host, which, having worked in restaurants myself, in and out of college, I think it's a very exhausting job. So kudos to him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Carolyn, it's a really good note to bring up the campaign manager higher in the list. Not something I'd thought of before, but we'll definitely float that to him. And No, I couldn't agree more about the part-time job. It's actually what he chose to write about in his personal statement, which we'll take a quick look at. We can jump to the grades really fast, really just more as a method of proving out. He's definitely got the academic chops for a competitive Stanford applicant. Really in brief, you can't get to number one in your class unless you have all A's, and that's what he has, and really is pushing every boundary to get himself more access to highly rigorous courses. So really more of a, just so you know, it is there, and it does really hold. And so I think now we will move over to the personal statement, because I think it's a great segue over from the part-time job thing. And I know that I appreciate you guys have read all this beforehand, as we do before every roundtable. But at least for me, this is one of those personal statements where you're reading it and you're like, wow, this is a great story, but you learn a lot about the student, and that's the kind of personal statement that really, really resonates with readers. I hope you feel the same way, but also certainly open for any feedback that you might have for the student.
Yeah, I think what is so great about this personal statement is that not only do we get some context about the student's background, right? How he is growing up, and how he's working, and how his mom is a part of all of this, and his background is so clear here. But we also get a sense of his voice. I really like the way that the student talks about all of the things that he does, and then his feelings, right? We get things he's done and the reflection on what it means about his life, his situation, and his perspective. And I think that really strong personal statements do that. And he's really pulled a nice narrative out here while telling us a lot of important information.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really strong essay. I think he does a great job, particularly in the first half, of using show, don't tell. So being really descriptive and very vivid in his language. I really love essays that can manage to do multiple things at once. So we get a little bit of an expansion on one of his activities. We also get some insight into his family, as well as just, like Victoria is saying, his personal perspective and voice. I think if there was one thing to potentially improve here, the thesis of the essay is really around kind of keeping these two different parts of his life separate, and how he kind of came to the realization that he doesn't necessarily need to do that. His family life, his extracurricular activities, that those two worlds can very much coexist. And I was left a little bit with the question of kind of what was the impetus for him to have that realization, and kind of what was the catalyst behind that turn, whether it was a conversation that he had with someone, or even just a realization that he had for any particular reason during that event, to kind of put a stamp on that turn there, would be my only suggestion. But like I said, I think this is a really strong essay that gives us a lot of insight into who he is as a person, and that's really what you want your personal statement to do.
Yeah, it's funny because I think for me that was sort of implied in the essay, but you're right that he could come out more directly and say that it was sort of this moment, what the moment was. I guess for me, I assumed the moment was this sort of embarrassment that sometimes can come from two parts of your life colliding that you think ought not to collide. And especially when you're dealing with being somebody from a low income background surrounded by people who are not from that background, it can make you really feel that pressure of wearing the mask, right? And I feel like I really got the sense of that without him directly saying it, but it is worth noting that if not everyone's getting it from the indirect way of that he's writing it, he may want to consider writing it from a more direct perspective of, I had this moment of realization, and explaining that feeling.
Yeah, Carolyn, I think it's the show don't tell piece that I really liked here for him, and it's something that he definitely worked pretty hard on to bring together this converging ideas of major involvement, his personal life, which can be a little bit difficult for some students to write about, but then also literally his part-time job, something else that he's involved in. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear that that you guys enjoyed it. And this is something I think he was a little worried about, like, the sort of those interrupter internal monologues. It's something that I actually enjoy. I think they kind of add a bit of almost like suspense and a carried, almost like a carried tone throughout that he's searching for something else. But do you find it distracting, or you kind of understood what was going on there?
I loved it. Yeah, I thought that was where his voice really came through, and
Okay, great.
was painting the picture of the event, and that's where I got this sort of sense of the nervousness and the anxiety surrounding having to act one way and maybe thinking about your background in another way, and that is really tough. And I think he shows a lot of maturity in this essay by talking about those things.
Yeah, I didn't find it distracting at all. I thought it was a really great way to, like Victoria was saying, give insight, but also kind of move the reader along in an interesting way. If anything, you might even be able to add more of that in the second half of the essay, but I really liked it. Okay,
awesome. That's great. Yeah, it's something he's worked on throughout the summer into now. Yeah, I think I really wanted him to bring out this true personal side of himself and save some of the accomplishments for later. And that's kind of what we'll do now. You'll see a lot of this in the Stanford essay, but hopefully you're getting a good amount of who he is and some more of this personality and voice. So that's definitely something I'll hope that you can look out for as we do the Stanford essays. So we'll transition over into that. As we know, there's a lot of Stanford essays. We'll probably might as well just take them in order. The letter to the roommate kind of gets people sometimes. But I found that the student kind of like really leans into the voice aspect of it. That's something that maybe kind of pushes the envelope from that side of tones. But I kind of liked it personally. What do you think? Anything a little too far?
I think it's got a great balance here. It's really fun, and he has a great energy in this essay, which I think is important. I think Stanford is looking to see, hey, are you going to be a great roommate to someone? Are you going to be somebody likable who people would love to live with? And then also they're trying to get a little bit more information about who you are, and I think he does both here pretty well. I love the optimist energy and the reaching out and sharing part of his background, his culture. So that's really nice. I really like it.
I really enjoyed this as well. Like you were saying, some of the responses to this prompt can feel a little awkward, a little bit quirky, but I really enjoyed this response. If I were an incoming student, I would thoroughly enjoy being the student's roommate. I'm a Kentucky girl, so the shout out to L8 and the idea of bringing his Kentucky identity to the table definitely really resonated with me. I think that was great. There was one just like very minor technical correction that I have in the second paragraph. I think about halfway through, he talks about our discussions will likely include both X to Y, and I think he meant both and or from to. He got a little bit was confused there, but just a super small note. Overall, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Good grammar connect. But I'm glad. I always love when I have to Google something when I'm reading an essay. And so I was like, I've never heard of AL8, but I'm glad you have, Carolyn.
You should check it out.
Yeah, I will next time I head on down. Cool, good. I'm glad. Like, to me, this is the essay to just go 100% personality on, and I feel like you did that pretty well. So for number 2, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, I think what will become clear as we go through the rest of these essays is that a lot of Stanford's other essays are incredibly intellectual. So anyone who's just jumping on to this first one, there's going to be a lot of essays here that are going to deal with his academic interests and things like that. So in that context, I always usually come back to this one last because I think it offers a chance to kind of fill in the details of all the things you didn't get to say when you were concentrating on your academic interests. And he keeps it nice and light, which I like too, because you do want that sort of person who could still have fun even though they're
Mhm.
academically strong and academically you're going to be studying. You still want somebody who might go watch MTV with you, right? So that's all I was going to add, is that anyone popping in, you're going to see this is not, the only essay. There are many more coming.
Yeah. And the next one, kind of almost a perfect foil maybe to the roommate essay, is the what's meaningful to you and why. And I think some students really, can take a softer approach to this essay. This student wanted this to really highlight his as a potential future politician, maybe as he sees himself. Really almost wants to assert some knowledge and some beliefs here. But I know, much like the old adage goes, politics and religion, things you avoid at a dinner party. But Roe v. Wade, plenty of thoughts on both sides that exist in our society here. So, I think I'm okay with it here because he is also sort of using this as a chance to showcase his environment, where he lives, and maybe feeling like kind of the minority in terms of his belief system. But yeah, I guess is this a calculated risk, one worth taking, or what thoughts do you guys have about this topic here?
I think that certainly the idea of writing about Roe versus Wade is very much a hot topic, and I think in itself is always going to be a little bit of a risk. I think he does it in a way, though, that's not super contentious. It's not, here's what I think about Roe v. Wade. It's him responding to a question about how important the case is, and I think regardless of what side of the issue you're on, it's an important case. So I don't think he necessarily alienates anyone too strongly in his response, and it's certainly representative of his political ideology, but also kind of gives us an idea of his place within his community. The one kind of mental question that I had is to what extent, and I don't know, is this dramatized? Is he actually the only person in the class who thinks remotely the way that he does? And maybe he is. And so I certainly don't want to fault that if that's the case. But I did kind of have that question in my head of, is this a dramatization of what actually happened? Or is this something that genuinely has happened to him on a regular basis? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but I think, well, you live in the area, right, Carolyn? And I have parents who live in the area. And I think, to me, it was totally believable that he could be one of the only people who holds this belief. And what I really loved about this piece is that I think, an essay about Roe versus Wade, somebody might say, you can't write about that. It's about abortion. And there are so many topics that happen like that. You can't write about that. It's about your parents' divorce. And it's not always true. I think that it always depends on the way you write about something. And I think the point of this essay is not really about Roe versus Wade. That is part of the what he's discussing here. But the real point is that he finds it incredibly important. What is meaningful to him is standing up for what he believes in. And I love that he chose to write about a value here. I think a lot of students don't always go that direction. And when he writes about it in that context, now it's less about what his actual beliefs about Roe versus Wade are, and more about his commitment to discourse and sharing, what he believes and standing up for that, despite feeling like the odd man out, which I think is really, again, a very mature take on a subject that a lot of people debate and get very heated about.
Yeah. I think he also does a really great job throughout the application of being very straightforward and taking ownership over his own identity. And so even by the time you get to the second essay, part of the reason why doesn't feel contentious or alienating is because you already know that this is who he is and this is the stance that he's going to take. So there's nothing surprising about it. It's just very much his identity, and he's reflected that throughout all of his responses really well.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear some reassuring feedback, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a part of me that was worried. He definitely takes uses some strong language, right? And almost describing some of his classmates, right? The ones who probably are frequenting the aisles in the Church of Christ, and this is an attack on their morality. But he does make sure that he arrives pretty quickly at, by the end of the first paragraph at the point that this is about, he either advocates for his value or he stays silent in the face of really just peer pressure, right? And for him, nothing matters more than advocating for something he believes in and that discourse, right? As you were saying, Victoria. So I'm glad that that's kind of the most evident part. It's not lost on the drama, if you will.
Yeah.
So, obviously we've got a lot in Stanford, so, and I won't make us go through all of them, but I think if we go to Essay 5, he actually, I think, takes a little bit of a unique approach here. The 50-word limit essays for Stanford, there's a lot of them, and I think it's really hard to say a lot in 50 words. I'm not rocket science there, but it takes a lot to pack it in. So how do you feel about this sort of grouping method instead of, what do you read, listen to, or watch when the choice is yours, in a listing form, or maybe, I read this, I listen this, I watch that. He sort of groups them into themes, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I typically see the other way, right? Where they say read, books that they read, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I would say I find that completely effective if you have a great collection of works to talk about. But I really like the creativity here, and it gives me both insight into why he's writing about these particular things, and why they might matter to him. So now I know that he doesn't just like Travis Scott. It motivates him, and that's fun. That's a fun detail. And these types of things, I think I want to reiterate, like, these matter, right? It's a 50-word limit. How many times do you guys get students who say things like, oh yeah, it doesn't really matter what I put in these, it's 50 words, but it really does. It gives you so much more information if it's done well.
Yeah, I really liked the groupings. I thought it was a very clever way to kind of add just a little bit more context. I think that's part of the limitations of some of these is when you're writing a list, you don't really get the chance to add, here's why I like this, or here's the context in which I like this. So I enjoyed that. I have a question around the proper punctuation or italicization or whatever of podcasts. I'm not sure what the rules are around that. I should probably look that up. I'm on a podcast right now.
Yeah, right.
But just something to think about there. And then also considering potentially adding for those of us who maybe don't know that Morning Edition is a podcast or a radio show or what have you, because they're not in those categories by format, it might be helpful to add those labels there. And I know that we're crunched for space here, but I know some of those categories, hype and motivation, does he need both of those? There's some room to edit there.
Yep. No,
I think he actually has a lot of words left here, if I'm counting correctly. So he could probably put a parenthetical around some of these. You're right, Carolyn. That would help. I actually don't know what the New Washington is. I assume it's a newspaper, but I don't know. Or maybe it's an online news site.
Yeah, online political something or other. But yeah, perfect. There's a case in point right there, right? So yeah, I think he's got 5 words or so to spare. So adding the word podcast, adding the word political magazine, or it's not going to undo him here. So I thought, to me, this is probably talk about, as you were saying, Victoria, making the most out of really small essays. I thought this was maybe one of his probably the most creative approach he took in all of the Stanford answers, was just to kind of turn this a little bit sideways and not just follow the prompt, but share what he reads and listens to and watch. But here's my philosophical side. Here's my when I need hype side. Here's my when I want to stay informed side. So cool. I'll take us to essay 9 actually, because this is where he's actually got a couple options that he is looking for the roundtable's guidance on. This is a fun one. What 5 words best describe you? Again, as you can see, and I kind of like it too. Instead of just going 5 individual adjectives, option 1 and 2 is literally a phrase, that kind of describes him. But do you think that captures him enough, or is he missing out if he doesn't choose, the five listed words?
Yeah, I kind of went back and forth on this one. I do think that option number 3 is certainly the more traditional. I think this, we can assume is what Stanford is thinking about when they're writing this question. But I have to say option 2 made me smile when I read it. And looking at the words that he includes in option 3, pioneering ENTJ, like we already know those things about him. So I don't necessarily think that he loses anything if he goes with option 1 or 2. Adds a little bit of joy, and I don't necessarily think it takes anything away that isn't already represented in other responses that he has here.
Yeah, I went back and forth as well. I was really choosing between 2 and 3. I would say 1 for me, I was just kind of a little baffled. Like it was kind of like quirky, which I thought was like funny, but I was also wondering, ooh, in what context are the shorts? Like, is that a reference to something I'm not getting, or is he just being funny? So because so much was left up in the air, I think I wouldn't choose that one. But the second one also made me smile, kind of laugh. And then I did think, oh, I really like the third one, but he does say that he found out he's an ENTJ in another piece. And we can tell that he's, understanding and bold by the essay we just spoke about 2 essays ago, right? So I agree that kind of option 2 offers a new perspective in a fun way that I like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a low-key cold brew addict, so I identify. I think many of us in admissions, like you don't read dozens of applications without a little bit of caffeine.
That's true.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm kind of encouraging him maybe to. He wants to take risks. I'm almost kind of like, I think you can do it. It's like there's some students who maybe they're pushing the envelope for the sake of doing it, but like it continues to come off genuine for the students. So I kind of find myself gravitating to option 2 as well. But it's good to know kind of 2 or 3 is where he can put his time. I think we can kind of finish up with the two more 50-word essays. So essay number 10. I guess like this is one too. The imagine you had an extra hour in a day. How would you spend that time? This is the one he probably had the biggest trouble with because he wanted to continue to maybe show some intellectualism, to share what, staying informed on things. What would he do? He's, community activist or school activist or whatnot. But this was one of the couple that he wrote for me about his grandma. And I was just really taken with how sincere it was. But do you feel like it, for Stanford especially, do we need more intellectual punch, or did this kind of hit home in the right way for you too?
I wasn't necessarily missing the intellectual nature of this. I appreciated the earnestness and kind of seeing a different aspect of his identity as in his experience. And I think that's the big thing. If he has a more academic or intellectual version of this response that adds something that we haven't seen elsewhere, that may be worth looking at. But if it sticks on the same topics as the other academic responses that he has, then I think writing something that introduces something new. That's one of the benefits of having an application with 10 supplements, is that you can tell a lot of things about yourself, and we all have far more than 10 things about ourselves that are important. And so I liked that he brought in something new at the end of the application here.
Yeah, and I think the key is triangulating your responses so that you have enough intellectualism throughout the piece, but also enough parts of all your different sides, right? In a piece or in an application with 10 different pieces, 10 different responses, as Carolyn said, you have so many opportunities to showcase a bunch of your different interests, a bunch of your different activities you've done. And he does have quite a few other pieces that we haven't yet talked about that are intellectual in nature. So I don't think that this one needs to be. I think this and the roommate letter can be a little bit more personal in nature and give that kind of warm and cuddly side to his application.
I also think our reactions to this response, as well as the roommate note and the cold brew essay, just to note, would be very different if he didn't have the 4.0 and the 35 and the incredible activity list. Like he's got the chops and he knows it. Like that all of that substantive stuff has already been established. So that gives him a little bit more flexibility to show different sides of his personality. I think this would be a very different conversation with a different student. But because he is so strong in his profile, it gives him a little bit more room to play around, I think.
Yeah. And I think too, if same kind of idea, if the 250-word essays had been written all about grandma, then we might also have a different reaction, right? But the 50-word response, I think, is totally appropriate and gives us that that nice idea of him being a warm and very compatible classmate, roommate, doormate. I always say the kid who would go get the chicken noodle soup for somebody when they're sick.
Yeah, totally. I think he would.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I'm always, I try to encourage students I work with to be labeled, right? Like in high school, you don't want to be labeled, but like in the admissions process, you do. Like you want to be like, yeah, the kid who's going to bring soup to his roommate, right? Or the, whatever that sort of moniker is, you kind of want those emotions to start to get tied to your application, I think, because that's what's going to pull you out of a very, very competitive pile at a school like Stanford, right? And lastly, really, especially, it's probably my favorite in the group, is essay 11. And again, we go back to his willingness to kind of maybe push a political envelope, but kind of, again, takes a little bit more of a creative approach here. A historical moment or event you wish you could have witnessed. It didn't actually happen. Is that okay with you? And again, he's writing super political, and his reader may not agree with his political views. Is it worth the risk?
Yeah, this one's a tough one. I think it's a great risk. In all the years that I've been reading these Stanford supplements, you can get a lot of recurring historical moments, actually, and I think those can be incredibly interesting if you have a great connection to them. But I've never seen someone take this approach where it is an imagined historical moment that I think some people would not like to see. But as I don't think it's too big of a risk. I think it's risky, but I think even the idea that somebody might disagree and not want Sanders to have won, they're not going to get angry at this response. He's interested in political science. He's clearly worked for a campaign that we already know these things about him from other essays, that he has this viewpoint, and there's nothing quite offensive about it at all. I think it's fun, and I'm with him. I relate. I would have loved to have seen this moment.
Yeah. I agree. I think the risk that you run when you interpret a question differently than what it seems to be getting at is that you don't want the admissions committee to think, oh, he didn't understand the question. But again, kind of like I was saying before, at this point, we know this student really well. There's no concern in my mind that he didn't understand the question. This is just how he chose to respond to it. And so I appreciate that risk taking and that creativity. I think on the topic of the political responses, this is also a testament to applying to schools that are a really strong fit for you. I'm reading these applications from the perspective of, if I were a Stanford admissions counselor, I think the response or reaction to these essays at a different school in a different part of the country might be very different. But because he's chosen a school that is going to, it fits his personalities and identity and his perspectives really well, and is really going to value him as a student, makes these essays work even more.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think he really emphasized the word wish in the "what event do you wish you could have witnessed?" Yeah, it would have been, that's a fun, okay, what did you dream about? Cool. I'm really, he's obviously, the Stanford requires a lot out of these students to apply. And, he knows it's a dream. He knows it's a long shot, because for everybody, Stanford's a long shot. But I'm glad to hear some positive reactions to a lot of how it's written, what it's writing about, what he's kind of chosen. So this is really, really helpful. I'm going to bring this feedback back to him and make a few tweaks as you suggested here and there. But this seems like this is, almost ready to go, which he will be very excited about. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. No problem.